The Western Cape continues to battle high levels of gang-related violence. Crime statistics for the second quarter showing that the province recorded a slight decrease in serious crimes such as murder and rape. The Western Cape Community Safety spokesperson is Jan Jan Joubert, and he joins us now for some detail as to what came out of that Western Cape crime stats. Jan Jan, good evening to you, and thank you for your time this evening. It surely does not sit well with the leadership of the province when you hear that the Western Cape has surpassed KZN as the murder capital. What are the key drivers there?
Good evening, Coley, and good evening to your listeners and your viewers. Yes, no, the Western Cape is certainly not happy about these figures. I have to correct you, though, that we were number one for murder in the previous quarter, and we have now been overtaken by the Eastern Cape. That said, this is not a numbers game. These are lives that are at stake. We are blessed and thankful that our numbers have come down. It's been extremely hard work by SAPS, by the Provincial Department of Police Oversight and Community Safety, by the neighborhood watchers, by every single person in a farm watch, everyone who worked extremely hard to try and get this, our K9 units, our community policing forums and our community safety forums. However, this is merely a start to a process which we want to see a continued decline in these numbers. We must also remember that these numbers are compared to last year this time, and last year this time was the taxi violence which hit Cape Town extremely hard. So we are certainly not going to rest on our laurels. We know that to beat crime in the Western Cape, all of us must work together. Yeah.
Gangs, Jan Jan, gangs have become a menace to the Western Cape society. In fact, I would venture and say they probably are the biggest drivers of murder in the Western Cape. What is it about gangs that province is unable to shake down?
Ollie, that's $1 million question, and much research has been done on it. We could speak about that for the whole night. I think that the consensus would be that in the Western Cape, because of the previous system of government, the apartheid system, there's a lot of communities that were uprooted in many ways. And the interesting thing is that there are differences in the predominantly colored areas, the gangs there, and the predominantly African areas on the Cape Flats as well. They are adjacent to each other. But what you will find in the colored gangs is that the history goes back an extremely long time. It's actually not become a problem in the Western Cape. It has been a problem for perhaps 100 years, perhaps more. And it's become ingrained in society. So the only way to tackle it is a whole of society approach, which the Western Cape government is attempting to do. We must admit that the vast majority of gang-related problems are in the Western Cape. The statistics can't lie. But what I was saying was that in the colored areas, you have established gangs and they are very structured. Whereas in the predominantly African areas, you also have gangs, but they tend to be much, much smaller. Your predominantly colored gangs have hundreds of members very often and long histories. In the African areas, we find them more fluid and much smaller. 3 people who will gang up for a while and then perhaps 4 others. The other thing with gangs in the Western Cape at the moment is that very many of the, especially predominantly colored gangs as leaders, are currently in court. We have many people who are alleged to be gang leaders, and which the Department of Justice is absolutely very, very firm that they will be found guilty. But what that has created in parts of the Western Cape, especially parts of the Cape Flats and predominantly colored parts of the Cape Flats, is a vacuum which smaller gangs or upstarts are now trying to fill. The other thing that we find, Polly, and which we are strongly addressing, is that parolees who are released from prison and then go back to specific areas are often blamed by our neighborhood watchers, by our CPFs, community policing forums, and by the police themselves for trying to re-establish themselves, having returned from prison into these dens of iniquity. And then the community taking shots because then there are double murders and even triple murders, and we've seen that in our predominantly coloured areas.
Yeah.
What we are working on with the Department of Correctional Service National Minister Dr. Pieter Groenewald and the Western Cape Minister of Police Oversight and Community Safety, Mrs. Anru Marais, they have met, and what we are creating is that there will be a compunction on the Department of Correctional Services to provide the information of the parolees who are released into a specific area. At this stage, can you believe that there's no compunction on the Department of Correctional Services to actually do that? So we are working on that regulation together with the Department of Correctional Services, and it's one of the fruits, I believe, of the Government of National Unity, which will certainly help our beleaguered areas in the Western Cape.
The last point I'd like to touch on, Jan Jan, is organized crime, which is targeting construction projects, and there's extortion involved as well. And I suspect what is particularly embarrassing for the Western Cape government in total is to see an MMC, this is a member of the mayoral committee in Cape Town, Malusi Boy, being part or being among those that are arrested, among the so-called gang leaders arrested as part of this extortionist racket. How are you dealing with that?
Well, clearly the difference between the Western Cape and in this specific case, it's not really us, it's the city of Cape Town. The difference between the Western Cape and the rest of the country is that the situation is being dealt with. You do not see Mr. Malusi Boy continuing as MMC. The moment that those issues came to light, the mayor of Cape Town, Jordan Hill Lewis, got rid of Mr. Boy. He was fired, and he was dealt with. There was management of that situation. It's not like in some other cities, which I will rather not mention, and some areas, and I can say that they are to our north and east, where you find that people are just kept in those positions and they stay there, and that extortion and this sort of corruption is not dealt with. So, of course, the Western Cape will fight extortion with every sinew in our body, and we are doing so continuously. You will see, if you were to follow the actual crime in the Western Cape, that we've had spectacular successes, and that indeed the crime intelligence in this specific cases of extortion, where we saw excellent cooperation with private security, with the city police, with the LEAP officers, which are funded by the provincial government and managed by the city of Cape Town, and with SAPS. They work together, and that's why those 14 people were, basically met their comeuppance in Kailicha. That's why in Dunoon there is much less extortion, because the gangs there have been uprooted, and that's why we had a hold up on the N1 when extortionists were dealt with very harshly by the law enforcement officers, the police, and private security working together. The Western Cape is absolutely focused on tackling all three of the extortion methods that we tend to see here. One is the construction mafia. The other is the sort of old-style mafia, where you have the bars and the nightclubs being extorted. And the final one, which breaks my heart, is the gogo selling vegetables on the sidewalk and barely keeping above the breadline, who has goods confiscated if she does not pay the extortionists. The Western Cape government will not rest until this problem is solved.
Jan Jan Joubert, thank you very much for your time. Western Cape Community Safety spokesperson, talking to us about the release of the crime stats in that province.